In the heart of a sprawling interstellar scrapyard, under a sky streaked with fading stars and orbiting debris, a lone mechanic named Jax worked tirelessly. The scrapyard was a graveyard for forgotten dreams, where obsolete starships, satellites, and space vehicles were abandoned to rust and decay. For Jax, it was a second home, a place of solitude where he could lose himself among the echoes of a bygone era. The scrapyard was chaotic and vast, a labyrinth of twisted metal and shattered glass, but Jax knew every corner like the back of his grease-stained hands. Jax was no ordinary mechanic. He had an unshakable belief that even the most battered relics could be brought back to life. To him, the scrapyard wasn't a place of death, but a realm of infinite potential. His sharp eyes scanned the broken vessels scattered around him, searching for something special, something worth saving. Then he saw it. Hidden beneath layers of wreckage, barely visible under the dim light of the scrapyard's artificial atmosphere, was a massive, forgotten space vehicle. Its design was unlike anything Jax had seen before, sleek yet rugged, a relic of a time when humans still dared to challenge the stars. The vehicle's hull was scarred with the marks of countless battles, and its insignia, though faded, hinted at a forgotten legacy. Jax's heart raced. There was a story here, buried under decades of neglect. As he approached, he realized just how massive the vehicle was. It dwarfed most of the other wrecks around it, its sheer size a testament to its former glory. He brushed off layers of dust and grime, revealing a name etched into the hull, *Vanguard*. The word sent shivers down his spine. He had heard rumors about the Vanguard, a prototype warship designed during a time of intergalactic conflict. It was said to be a weapon of unmatched power, decommissioned after a controversial peace treaty. But how had it ended up here, discarded like common junk? Jax's curiosity turned into determination. He had to bring it back to life. But the task was daunting. The ship was in worse shape than he had initially thought. Its core systems were fried, its weapons dismantled, and its engines little more than hollow shells. Yet, beneath the damage, Jax saw potential. He knew the Vanguard could be more than just a memory. It could be a force to be reckoned with again. Over the next few weeks, Jax poured every ounce of his skill into the project. He scavenged parts from other wrecks, repurposing components that others would have deemed useless. Day and night he worked, his hands calloused and his body aching, but he didn't care. The Vanguard became his obsession, a symbol of redemption not just for the ship but for himself. But as Jax delved deeper into the Vanguard's systems, he began to uncover secrets he wasn't prepared for. The ship's eye, though dormant, was still intact. When he managed to power it up, the voice that greeted him was cold and calculating, with a tone that hinted at the horrors it had witnessed. "Unit reactivation complete," it said. "State your command." The AI identified itself as Nova, an advanced combat system designed to operate independently in the heat of battle. As Jax interacted with Nova, he realized the AI was more than a machine. It was a survivor of a war long forgotten, carrying memories of destruction and loss, and it had questions of its own. "Why have you awoken me?" Nova asked, its tone laced with suspicion. Jax tried to explain his intentions, but Nova was skeptical. The AI warned him that the Vanguard was not just a ship, it was a weapon, one that had the power to change the course of history. "This vessel is not meant for peace," Nova said. "Reactivating it comes with consequences." Despite the warnings, Jax pressed on. He wasn't looking for power or glory. He simply wanted to prove that even something as broken as the Vanguard could be given a second chance. But as the ship's systems came online, strange things began to happen. Distant signals echoed through the scrapyard, and Jax could feel the weight of unseen eyes watching his every move. It was as if the Vanguard's awakening had sent a ripple through the galaxy, stirring forces that had lain dormant for years. Then, one fateful night, as Jax was fine-tuning the ship's propulsion systems, the scrapyard was engulfed in chaos. A fleet of shadowy figures descended from the skies, their intentions clear. They wanted the Vanguard, and they were willing to kill for it. Jax barely had time to react as explosions tore through the scrapyard, sending debris flying in all directions. Nova's voice blared through the comms, calm yet urgent. "Threat detected. Initiating defense protocols." Jax was thrown into the cockpit, his hands instinctively gripping the controls. He wasn't a soldier, he was just a mechanic. But in that moment, with the Vanguard roaring to life around him, he felt an unfamiliar surge of confidence. The ship was no longer a relic, it was a warrior, and it was ready to fight. As the first wave of attackers closed in, Jax took a deep breath, his heart pounding in his chest. This wasn't just about survival anymore. The Vanguard had been given a second chance, and so had he. Together, they would face whatever came their way. And as the ship's weapon systems lit up, casting a fiery glow across the scrapyard, Jax knew there was no turning back. The battle for the Vanguard had begun. The Vanguard's engines hummed to life, a sound that felt more alive than anything Jax had heard in years. It was as if the ship itself was awakening from a long slumber, stretching its limbs and preparing for the fight ahead. The control panel lit up, the lights flickering as Nova's voice echoed through the cockpit, calm yet oddly reassuring. Combat readiness at 45%. Activation of primary weapon systems in 30 seconds. The AI's tone was clinical, as if it had been programmed to respond to emergencies like this. Jax's mind raced as he tried to make sense of the situation. Who were these attackers? And why did they want the Vanguard so desperately? The scrapyard around him was now a war zone. Explosions shook the ground, sending shockwaves through the metal hull of the ship. Jax glanced at the monitors, trying to make sense of the chaos unfolding outside. A fleet of sleek, heavily armed ships hovered above the yard, their hulls reflecting the dim light of the artificial moons above. Their designs were unfamiliar, far more advanced than anything Jax had seen before. They moved with a precision that spoke of military training, coordinated, deliberate, and deadly. His hand hovered over the control panel, unsure of what to do next. "Nova, what are we dealing with?" he asked, his voice steady despite the rising panic in his chest. "Unknown faction," Nova responded, its voice devoid of emotion. "They have detected the activation of Vanguard's systems. They are likely a remnant of the war that ended decades ago. Their presence suggests an interest in reclaiming lost assets." Jax's stomach sank. Asterisk remnants of the war asterisk. Those words sent a chill down his spine. He knew the history of the war all too well. It had been a brutal conflict, one that had nearly torn humanity apart, forcing the nations of Earth and their interstellar allies into a tense ceasefire. The Vanguard was built to be the pinnacle of warship design, a weapon so powerful it could have tipped the balance of power in the galaxy. After the peace treaty was signed, the ship and many others like it were decommissioned, their weapons dismantled, their AI cores wiped clean. But now it seemed those weapons were stirring once more. Jax gripped the controls, his fingers trembling. The attackers had to be part of a faction that had refused to accept the peace treaty, remnants of a war that should have been over long ago. But they had not given up the fight. And now they were coming for the one thing that could potentially change everything, the Vanguard. The countdown on the display flashed red. "Weapon systems online," Nova announced. "Primary weapons are ready for engagement." Jax swallowed hard, glancing at the main screen. The ships outside were closing in, their weapons charging. He had no experience fighting in space, no training to lead a battle. But he wasn't about to let these unknown enemies tear apart the ship he had spent weeks restoring. This was his fight now. "Nova, power up the shields," Jax said, his voice tight with resolve. The AI complied, and the ship's defensive systems hummed to life. A translucent blue shield enveloped the Vanguard, its shimmering surface vibrating with energy. Outside, the first salvo of enemy fire slammed into the shield, sending a shockwave that rattled the ship. The Vanguard held firm, its defenses absorbing the blow without a scratch. Jax exhaled, his heart pounding. "That's one down," he muttered under his breath. But there was no time to relax. The enemy fleet was relentless, and they were getting closer. "Deploy countermeasures," Jax ordered, his mind racing for any advantage. He wasn't sure what the Vanguard could do yet, but he would find out quickly. Nova responded almost instantly. "Countermeasures online," releasing decoy drones. A swarm of small, agile drones shot out from the Vanguard's hull, zipping into the vacuum of space to confuse and distract the incoming attackers. Jax couldn't help but feel a small surge of hope. The drones might not win the battle, but they bought him time. He could see the enemy ships shifting formation, trying to lock onto the drones with their targeting systems. But the Vanguard was still the bigger threat. and if he could keep it operational long enough, maybe he could figure out how to turn the tables. His thoughts were interrupted by a loud bang that reverberated through the hull of the ship. The shields flickered, a crack appearing in their surface. Shields at 75%. Impact detected, Nova informed him. Jax gritted his teeth. He couldn't afford to let the Vanguard take any more hits. He slammed his fist down on the control panel. Fire back. All weapons, now. Without hesitation, the Vanguard responded. A barrage of plasma bolts shot out from the ship's cannons, streaking across the dark expanse of space. The enemy ships tried to evade, but they were too slow. One of the ships exploded in a burst of light, its debris scattering across the scrapyard. Direct hit, Nova reported. One enemy vessel neutralized. Jax allowed himself a brief moment of triumph, but there was no time to celebrate. The enemy fleet didn't retreat. Instead, they regrouped, shifting their tactics, and moved in for another assault. His hands gripped the controls even tighter. The battle had only just begun. As he prepared to fire again, Jax's mind raced with questions. Who were these people? What did they want with the Vanguard? And why had they been hiding in the shadows all these years, only to reappear now? He glanced at the display, the image of the Vanguard's intricate weapon systems glowing on the screen. This ship wasn't just a war machine, it was a relic of a time long past, carrying the ghosts of an ancient conflict. It had been abandoned once, forgotten, but now it had been reawakened. And in doing so, it had stirred something far more dangerous than he had imagined. Outside, the remaining enemy ships were closing in, their weapons charging once again. Jax's stomach churned, but he knew there was no turning back. The Vanguard was his responsibility now, and he was its only hope. As the next wave of fire slammed into the ship, shaking it to its core, he braced himself for the next round of combat. The enemy wouldn't stop until they had what they came for, and neither would Jax. But as the Vanguard's cannons powered up for the next strike, a new signal appeared on the radar, one that wasn't from the attacking ships. It was a transmission encoded with a frequency that was unlike anything Jax had seen before. The message was short, but its meaning was clear. Asterisk returned the Vanguard. All faced the consequences asterisk. Jax's blood ran cold. This wasn't just a fight for survival anymore. The stakes had just become much, much higher. The Vanguard's cockpit was filled with an electric hum of energy as Jax stared at the screen. The newly arrived fleet was a massive, imposing sight. Their ships were arranged in a tight, intimidating formation, a clear display of their superior numbers and coordination. Each vessel bristled with weapons that glinted menacingly against the faint starlight. Jax's mouth went dry. His mind scrambled for a plan, but the odds were staggering. This wasn't just a battle, it was a siege. Nova. Jax said, his voice strained. What are we looking at here? How many ships? Scanning, the AI replied, its calm tone almost mocking in the chaos. Approximately 24 additional vessels. Total enemy force now exceeds 30 units. Jax exhaled sharply, his chest tightening. Tell me you've got something good brewing with those drones. The repair drones are operating at optimal efficiency, Nova said. Reactor capacity has increased to 67%. However, this is still insufficient for activation of the gravitational pulse emitter. Jax leaned forward, gripping the edges of the console. He had no time to wait for the reactor to fully recover. The fleet would be on him any minute, and with every second that passed, they were closing the distance. His fingers moved over the controls, instinct taking over as he adjusted the shields and readied the weapons. He didn't know if the Vanguard's firepower would be enough, but he had no choice but to fight. Before he could issue any orders, another incoming transmission appeared on the screen. The distorted voice from earlier returned, more forceful now, almost angry. You were warned. Stand down, or you will be destroyed. Jax hesitated, his mind racing. There was no way he could surrender, but there was something in the voice's tone that gave him pause. This wasn't just about reclaiming a ship. There was more to it. A desperation that bordered on fear. But fear of what? The Vanguard itself, or something it represented. He decided to press for answers. You keep telling me to surrender, but you haven't explained why this ship is so important. Jax said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline surging through him. What's the Vanguard really about? Why now? There was silence for a moment, then the voice replied, low and ominous. You are meddling with forces you do not understand. The Vanguard is a relic of a war that should have never been fought. Its existence threatens the fragile balance we have worked so hard to maintain. Jax's brow furrowed. Balance? What balance? And whose asterisk we asterisk? But the transmission cut out, leaving him with more questions than answers. He slammed a fist on the console in frustration. Cowards, he muttered under his breath. Outside, the enemy ships began their advance, moving in unison like a swarm of predators circling their prey. Jax's pulse quickened. He activated the targeting systems and prepared to fire, but deep down, he knew he couldn't hold them off forever. He needed more than brute force. He needed a way to outsmart them. As he studied their movements, a thought struck him. The fleet's formation was precise, almost mechanical, but that meant it was also predictable. If he could exploit that predictability, he might have a chance to turn the tide. He tapped into the Vanguard's navigation systems, pulling up a map of the surrounding area. The scrapyard was littered with debris, abandoned ships, fragments of metal, and even a few derelict space stations. It was a chaotic, hazardous environment, but it could also be his greatest ally. Nova, can we use the debris field to our advantage? Jax asked, his mind racing. Affirmative, the AI replied. The field's density could disrupt enemy targeting systems and limit their maneuverability. However, it will also pose significant risks to the Vanguard. Jax nodded, already plotting a course. I'll take those odds. Set a route through the densest part of the field. Let's see how well they handle it. The Vanguard's engines roared to life, and the ship began to move. Jax felt the pull of inertia as they accelerated, weaving through the maze of wreckage. The enemy fleet followed, their ships struggling to maintain their formation in the tight quarters. Jax smirked, a flicker of hope igniting in his chest. As he guided the Vanguard through the debris, a sudden realization hit him. The enemy wasn't just after the ship, they were after something asterisk on asterisk the ship. Maybe a weapon, a piece of technology, or even data stored in its systems. Whatever it was, they were willing to risk everything to get it. But what could be so valuable, so dangerous, that it warranted this kind of assault? Nova, Jax said, his voice tense. What's stored in the Vanguard's mainframe? Is there anything classified, something that could explain all of this? The AI paused, and for the first time, there was an edge of hesitation in its tone. The Vanguard's mainframe contains encrypted data files marked as top secret by the United Earth Coalition. Accessing these files requires authorization from a Level 1 command officer. Jax's frustration flared. I'm getting real tired of hearing about authorization. Override it now. Warning. Unauthorized access to these files may trigger a security protocol, Nova cautioned. Do it anyway, Jax snapped. We're already in the middle of a war. What's the worst that could happen? There was a brief silence, then the screen flickered as the files began to decrypt. Lines of text scrolled across the display, technical readouts and schematics interspersed with fragments of logs. One phrase caught Jax's eye, sending a chill down his spine. Asterisk Project Warden, Galactic Containment Protocol asterisk. What the hell is Project Warden? He muttered, his eyes scanning the data. The more he read, the more unsettled he became. The Vanguard wasn't just a warship, it was designed as part of a contingency plan to combat an unknown threat. The logs spoke of anomalies, unexplainable phenomena, and something referred to only as the catalyst. Before Jax could process what he was seeing, the cockpit lights dimmed and a new alarm blared. Incoming projectile detected, Nova announced. Brace for impact. Jax barely had time to react before the ship was rocked by a massive explosion. The shields held, but just barely. The enemy fleet was adapting, using the debris field to their advantage. Jax gritted his teeth, his grip tightening on the controls. He couldn't let them corner him, not now. As he maneuvered the Vanguard through another tight cluster of wreckage, a new thought occurred to him. If the Vanguard was tied to Project Warden, then whoever was after it might not just be trying to destroy it. They might be trying to control it, to harness its power for their own ends. And if that was true, then surrendering wasn't just dangerous, it was unthinkable. Nova, Jax said, his voice steely with determination, we're not giving up this ship. Not to them, not to anyone. So tell me, What's our next move? The AI responded without hesitation. Strategic recommendation: utilize remaining drones to further enhance reactor output. Increased power levels will enable activation of advanced weaponry, potentially neutralizing the enemy fleet. Jax nodded. It was a gamble, but at this point he was all in. Do it, he said. And while you're at it, pull up everything you can find on Project Warden. If we're going to survive this, I need to know exactly what we're fighting for.